Oh baby, it's time for the big volume review for Volume 5 of My Hero Academia Vigilantes. The big one and the last My Hero Academia Vigilantes review for the next 6 months, as in a few weeks' time the new season of My Hero Academia will be starting, and that will be the main focus of the channel, at least until Doctor Who comes back around the same time, so I'm going to be very busy. But between then and now, let us get into the review by starting with the positives. And are we ending this season, or this volume, on a high? Well, I have to say that as a whole entity, this volume is fine enough, which, once again, does feel like damning with faint praise, but it's still true. This is not the worst My Hero Academia storyline, or even just My Hero Academia-related thing I've ever seen, though I have to say that it's easily the weakest My Hero Academia Vigilantes volume thus far, and I will admit that I did say that about the previous volume too, so goodness knows what the future holds with us with all that in mind, but still, this is supposed to be the positives, so let us concentrate on the positives and all the good things. And I have to say that for ultimately boils down to a few brief episodes meant as a palate cleanser from the previous volume, and then pivoting into a storyline which really doubles down on that palate cleansing. This is a light, bright, goofy little adventure full of plenty of jokes and fun moments with our characters, as well as some decent action sequences sprinkled in here and there for the thrill seekers to keep them interested, as well as a great little bit of drama towards the start of it, which, whilst is short-lived, is still welcome, especially in hindsight. I feel that whole stuff with Knuckle Duster and his daughter helps to add weight to this volume as a whole, and it gives us a closer look into that character and just what's going on with them that I think that we could quite easily have missed upon. As well as in the latter halves of this volume, we get a slightly closer look for our main villain that we're going to end up getting for I presume for the next few volumes, the guy that I keep referring to as the delivery man, or Vince Vaughn, depending on how sassy I want to be at the time. And the introduction and the closer look with that new villain helps make this feel a little bit more like a legitimate storyline. And by legitimate, I mean that this isn't a volume that's going to be just dismissed as being filler, though I do have a feeling that might be the case for certain people that read this, or people that might see this if it ever gets animated for an anime. This all gives us a volume which is competently put together and is entertaining enough without it ever feeling like it's a drag. It is standard, but a good standard and a non-boring standard. All the action sequences we get here are presented very well. Yes, I know I'm going to repeat myself when I say these things, but hey, there's only so many times you can say these things. It's got great shot composition. The panel work means that our action sequences are oftentimes impeccably paced and have a visual flair and dynamism to them which can really make for even some of the shorter action sequences to be thrilling and entertaining for what they are. And, you know, like I say, there's only so many ways you can say that the action sequences are well presented, because they are. The panel work, again, is done. They are done well, and how they're able to pick and choose between which are supposed to be the shorter ones and which are supposed to be the larger ones, which ones are supposed to have the greater sense of detail to them, and which are supposed to be just quicker and faster and quicker. I know I'm repeating myself, but we'll move on. The jokes and humour within this volume are fine enough. I will admit that the odd horniness in the opening episode, which was oddly funny, but yeah, I will admit it isn't my bag, but it's still well done for what we do get, and the jokes thereafter are good, often good for what we get, and solid enough. Though I will say that it does feel far sparser than I would have liked. I would have liked more of a even smattering of jokes throughout of it, maybe at least one joke per episode, which we didn't really get, or at least the jokes that we did end up getting weren't often as good as I would like them. With the My Hero Academia series, I feel that the humour works best when it's character-driven, and is reflective of our characters and their personalities, which is something we didn't really get that much of. Like I say, towards the start of this volume, it was all the lewd jokes, which are fine enough for what they are, but I think again, it works better when we have jokes that are about the characters themselves and the situation and the world that they're in, which is sadly not something we've got a whole lot of, but again, as a whole entity, the jokes are decent enough for what they are. The pacing for this whole volume was decent overall. I hate having to keep repeating myself by saying the word decent, but that's the best word I could think of. It's fine, it's good. I will admit that it did drag a little bit towards the middle of the volume, but it never felt like it was starting to overstay its welcome as a volume. There was never this feeling of, okay, can we now move on to something bigger? Can we now move on to something more exciting? Which I will admit, it did start to get towards that, but that was literally the episode before we started to get into more exciting stuff, which you know, again, I do wish there was more exciting stuff here, but just the pacing itself, on a purely mechanical and unfeeling, objective level, worked very well. I am frequently impressed by the way in which the writers are able to juggle a number of complex things without issues, which is remarkable given just how much the tone can shift in this particular volume. We have this harder drama stuff with Knuckle Duster trying to reconnect with his daughter and leaving the group unbeknownst to them. We have Crawler getting a dressing down from Captain Celebrity for making life harder for heroes. We have the drug smuggling operation, and all of this is balanced fairly decently well with some jokes and humour which often comes along. Again, not quite as good as jokes and humour as I would like it, but decent enough for what it is, and all this is done without anything feeling like it's stealing oxygen from one thing or another. Stealing the limelight, however, is a whole other matter, which I'll discuss later on. And I have to say that this was an interesting volume, or rather, this volume had a very interesting way in giving a major character a send-off. They just leave quietly without much fanfare. No big battle, no big ending speech, just a little line about how they didn't realise at the time this was the last time they were going to see them. This is, of course, referring to Knuckle Duster leaving the show, leaving the series, which... the way in which they do it adds a sense of realism to it. There are very few people in our lives that leave with a fanfare. They just kind of fade out of it, and it's not until months or years after the fact that we realise that they're gone. Granted, it is debatable or not whether this is good for a story. It is something of a subversion of expectations, but it doesn't really replace it with much in the me here and now. Though I do get this feeling we might see a little bit more of Knuckle Duster and his daughter in the not-too-distant future, and that itself might set up for a bigger send-off for them, a big final moment between Crawler and Knuckle Duster. But for the here and now, I respect how they did it, and I do respect that they didn't go down the full-on, cliched Hollywood goodbye sequence, or a more shonen anime thing of them having one big final fight, which... they did get in the previous volume, but that wasn't their goodbye. Their goodbye was towards the start of this volume, and again, it was good enough that I don't think it really works all that well in the context of a story like this. I will say that for the many, many issues I do have with this idol mascot convention thing, that I do think that it's a very creative idea, or at least I think it's a rather novel and unique idea for something like this. I will admit I don't think it lived up to that creativity, and I will be discussing this in greater detail in the negative section, but I think that for a tenuous means of getting our two main characters involved with this storyline, it was clever. Yes, you could have just done a storyline where they come across some kind of gang, or a warehouse full of drugs like some out of RoboCop, or some company being used as a front for all of this, but instead we get something that's incredibly atypical and distinct. And it does feel like it is keeping with the tone and spirit of the series as a whole, not just in terms of Vigilantes, but with the My Hero Academia series as a whole entity. It has a quirky freshness to it, which I have to commend, even if I don't think it ultimately stuck that landing. And this volume, at the end of it, sets up for an interesting following volume. I will admit the volume conclusion itself lacked a big epic moment, something that was really going to take our breath away, or recontextualise things, or just give us something that makes us go, wow, what a great adventure this was. We lack that, but at least we get the suggestion that Makoto's brother is now going to get a little bit more involved with Crawler and Popstep and investigate them more, because now he realises that they're not just civilians or people that just so happen to get wrapped up in villain stuff or were working as freelance sidekicks. They really are vigilantes, and now he's probably going to go after them and investigate them and possibly arrest them, which is setting up for something interesting and might play into more of the dynamics of vigilantism in this world, which I think is something that just hasn't been touched upon in much of a great detail for a very long time, and I'm interested to see where they go with that. However, of course, given the direction of the past couple of volumes, there is a part of me that worries that they just won't go with it anywhere at all, but with all that said, and where we share that and continue that feeling on, let's talk about the negatives. I think it's best as though we almost tackle this in a slightly semi-linear way, by saying that at the start of this volume we kick off with some overhang from the previous volume, aka the stuff with Knuckle Duster and his daughter. Just some stuff that really needed wrapping up in the previous volume, which wasn't, so it overhang into this one, and I have to say that it ultimately goes nowhere. And I don't mean that in the sense of it didn't have a a satisfactory conclusion, or it didn't go places that I wanted it to go, or I thought it would go, and I feel butthurt that my big brain idea wasn't seemingly accepted by the story. I just mean it in a more literal sense. It just barely has a single episode dedicated to it. We have the episode where Knuckle Duster sees his daughter and she's starting to wake up, and that's kind of it. It isn't quite a total dead end, and it does hint that there's going to be continued problems between Knuckle Duster and his daughter. As I said previously, this is not the big Hollywood reunion. This is not the, "Oh, Father, I was so scared. Don't worry, honey, I'm going to save you now," or anything like that. Just nothing. We get the feeling that they're going to have this long time of trying to repair their relationship and come back together and to no longer be so estranged as they were before. But I get the feeling we're just not going to see any of that. And there is a part of me that can't help feel that the reason why all the stuff with Knuckle Duster just didn't exist really beyond one episode was because of just how much time was spent focused on him in the previous episode, in the previous volume. And maybe it's because of that focus why we have this convention storyline in the first place. The vast majority of the runtime of the previous volume, rightly or wrongly, was focused on Knuckle Duster far more so than our main cast. And to then have a follow-up of the overhang being 2 or 3 episodes to wrap up for all of that, even if it did pause to get picked up in a future volume, that might have been too much to stomach for certain audience members, as at that point this wouldn't be the story of Krull and how he became a vigilante, or how he became a hero, how he came of age. It would end up feeling more like it's Knuckle Duster's story, and this is the Knuckle Duster show. And given that the Pop Step gig storyline from the previous volume got abandoned midway through it, if that, again, it would have made the entire series feel like, right, this is Knuckle Duster's story. This is all about Knuckle Duster now, and all the characters, when he's not on screen, are going to be going, "Where's Knuckle Duster?" So it feels like they needed to create a storyline which would draw on the talents of our 2 remaining cast members and give them something that felt more tailor-made for them, even though I don't think it was really utilised quite as well as that. You know, this only exists because the fact that so much time was spent on Knuckle Duster, so we had to create something that would just bring our main characters to the fore, and that is regrettably not what ended up happening here for me. On a somewhat tangentially related note, I think that Eraserhead's return in this volume was just utterly pointless. It didn't add anything to the main narrative, it didn't add anything to the plot, it added nothing to the story, and nothing that he did in this volume could not have been done by another character or just cut. All he really does in this entire volume for the time that he's here is have a neat little fight sequence with the 2 Kamen Rider looking guys and just deals out or has exposition dealt out to him. Oh sure, we learn that Trigger isn't the creation of one group and it's so common that there's different variations of it. Okay, that's neat world building, but it just doesn't really do that much. It kind of feels like world building for the sake of it, but at the same time you can make an argument that it isn't, and his presence at the gig towards the start of this volume, again, just exists for the sake of exposition, and he doesn't need to be there to facilitate that happening. Any other character could have done that. You could have created a new character to end up doing that. So his presence in this volume just, for me, feels like it's stealing thunder from a main cast member, which is what he did in the previous volume, and that he just exists, once again, just for the sake of exposition, either with it being delivered to him or him delivering it himself. There's an argument to be made that had he been in this volume more, he would have stolen more of the thunder of the main cast, but there is still this feeling that yes, he would have stolen time from the main cast members, but he would have at least done more. So you either commit to this character being in this volume, have them doing more, or you cut them out and replace them with someone else, or ideally have one of our main heroes being the one that's learning all this stuff and having the exposition delivered to them, or delivering it themselves, which is something we don't get. So much of our time with our main characters and cast members is spent with them doing next to nothing. So with that in mind, let us get on to the convention. Now, forgive me for repeating myself, because if you've been listening to these reviews from me for any length of time now, you'll be well aware of the issues that I have with the convention storyline. as I will just boil it down in just one sentence. I do not believe that the convention arc justifies its existence in any way, with almost every single problem I have with this volume being centered around it. I will admit that some of my issues with it might well be self-inflicted. It might be due to self-hype, because I'll be honest, it's kind of hard not to get hyped about all of this, because you have a storyline which is just so tailor-made for our main characters that it's an easy goal here. Especially when you bear in mind that it feels especially tailored to one character in particular, and opens up so many doors that they could have taken this down. Like, you can imagine how a storyline like this should go. A character tries to become famous or more famous by going to one of these conventions. There would be a rival character who thinks they're better or are just better than that character. There will be some funny moments of our main character trying to make a name for themselves, but they don't quite meet up with the standards of the industry or their rival standards. Said main character starts to have self-doubt and doesn't think they can do it, and either they manage to win despite the odds and becomes a bigger name for themselves, but in the process of that the relationship becomes a little bit more strained. Are they still going to be able to hang out with this character that they like and they kind of have feelings for, or are they going to have to put that to one side for the sake of their career? Or alternatively, they fail to win and you get a "you'll always be a winner in my eyes" moment, and the two characters become closer than ever before. Or failing all of that, you can just have a continuum of silly and wacky and goofy jokes. Our character adorably tries to become a big celebrity name, but just kind of falls flat at every opportunity, and you still get that "you'll always be a winner in my eyes" moment, and that's where you could go with that. And plus, with this being a superhero show and we know how this convention is being used to traffic drugs, then you could have gotten some social commentary on the entertainment industry, the pressures that aspiring new stars and less famous stars are put under to be the big entertaining presence. And that could have been interesting, especially if one of the rivals is involved in that or forced to be involved with that. Like, we think they're kind of uptight and snarky and self-important, but they themselves are incredibly self-confident, conscious, and they have to take these drugs to help them perform, and that could have been interesting. And I know that social commentary isn't to everyone's taste, especially these days, but even if you don't like that stuff, you can at least admit that would have added an element of dynamism here. But none of this happens. With either of our lead characters, they don't contribute much of anything apart from just bumming about the convention centre for the majority of the runtime of his storyline, not doing much of anything. They don't discover anything, aside from the fact that Snippy Crab Cop Lady isn't really a mascot idol, but they only learn that in the final episode of all of this, long after we as an audience have already learnt that. Crawler and Popsep are so absent from all of this that any attempts to build their relationship, either as friends or as potential romantic interests, goes nowhere, with it feeling like this entire arc is going out of its way not to use these characters at all. It feels like they came up with the drug smuggling plot thread idea first, and then they tried to think, right, how could our characters get involved with that? They tried to come up with some big idea that would tie them into that all a lot more closely, and this is the best thing that they could think of. But then decided, okay, so how can we do this in the most hands-off way possible, with our two main characters once again, and I'm afraid to have to keep beating this drum, doing very little. They don't discover the criminality that's going on here. They don't stumble upon it. It just happens around them, with the pro-heroes being ultimately the ones to solve everything. Our two lead characters have such little to do in this storyline and are so awkwardly connected to the events that are featured that they feel like fan characters in a fan fiction of a pre-existing story. This feels like this is the pre-existing storyline from another series. Like, this is a storyline from a hero-based spin-off of My Hero Academia. This is about the pro-heroes and, oh, these are my two original characters and this is how they got involved in all of this. But because the writers was at least self-aware enough, they didn't do anything that would bollocks up the storyline or change anything or stop it from happening. But, you know, they were still important enough to be involved and try and at least stop one of the robots. So, yeah. This might seem like an odd connection, but this storyline just reminds me of the Bourne Legacy, which is the fourth Bourne Identity movie. the basic plot idea with that is it turns out that there was another super secret super spy who was every bit as good as Jason Bourne and who was active at the same time Jason Bourne was. But, you know, given the events of the last movie, it's not like they could have done a sequel to the Jason Bourne movie, so they just had these events happening in parallel to the main story. But these aren't events happening elsewhere in the world. No. These are events happening almost in the exact same locations as the Jason Bourne movies were. So you have Jeremy Renner and love interest just being slotted into the background of those other events from the main series. So if you really wanted to know what was happening in the alleyways under the roofs where Jason Bourne was doing his parkour, well, now you know. But with here, it kind of feels even worse than that because our characters don't even have an effect on their own story, let alone this storyline with all the stuff with the drugs and drug smuggling. Like, this is just baffling here. They've gone out of their way to create this special, tailor-made storyline that is just so focused down, especially on one character in particular, and none of them do anything. They just spend their time wandering around the convention centre, one of them's put in a costume, and then they have to get saved in the end. And even then, our main character doesn't even save them. Whilst this is, as a whole entity, a lot more creative than had they just stumbled upon a warehouse or some kind of company that was being a front for this whole scenario, at least that would have made them a lot more of an active part in the events unfolding, at least in theory. Because it feels to me that there's this genuine feeling that the writers of this were more interested in showing us characters from the main series more so than developing the ones that we had here. Like, I get having cameos for these characters. I understand bringing in characters from the main storyline to just make this feel like a more connected and well-connected world, but it just feels like they're stealing airtime from our main heroes, stealing their thunder and giving them less to do. And it makes them feel like more of a passive observer within their own life story. Like, for this whole storyline, you can have jokes or don't have jokes. Have a crazy storyline or don't. Make this the most gritty and grounded thing you want to, or go totally off the wall for. But goodness sake, utilise our characters a lot more. Our main characters at that. I'd have been more forgiving of this had their limelight had been stolen to build up another character. But we don't get that. Eraserhead vanishes almost as soon as he appears, and Fat Gum is just there because he's kind of neat as a character, and that's it. Protagonists in any story, whether it's a manga, an anime, a comic book, a novel, a movie, a stage play, whatever you want, protagonists need to be proactive. They need to be an active part of the stories that they lead. And for far too long in this entire volume, neither Crawler nor Popstep felt like the protagonists. They felt like side characters. They felt like cameo appearances in their own story. And I guess I would have been a little bit more forgiving of this had we not gone through this almost exact same feeling in the previous volume, especially in the latter halves of it, and especially with Popstep herself. This is two storylines that have been tailor-made for this character, to which she just doesn't do anything bar for a brief sequence here or there. It's really rather infuriating. With all that said, let us get to the overview, and I have to say that as a whole entity, this volume is just rather lackluster. Yes, it's fun enough. Yes, it's entertaining enough. Maybe if you read this as a whole entity, just a sit-down binge read of it, you'll get more out of it than I would have done. But as someone that spent the past 7 or so weeks reading this volume, reading each episode, one after the other, it's a massive disappointment to it. Again, our main characters do next to nothing. The main plot thread barely involves and feels like it just exists for the sake of existing, and that simply isn't good enough. Yes, there's still some good things here, some good action sequences. The pacing's good, but praising the pacing is like praising a clock because it's still ticking. That's the absolute bare minimum you want the clock to be doing. You want it to tell the time. And if this was a clock, it wouldn't really tell you the time. But I suppose you could say, well, it's 3:30 somewhere in the world, so I guess it works. I know that's a tenuous analogy, but still, I'm really sorely disappointed with this one. It has good things in it, and I just have to hope that when we eventually come back to Vigilantes in a few months' time, that the next volume kicks it up a notch, because Otherwise, is that'll make for 3 volumes on the bounce, where it just feels rather lackluster, and I don't think I could end up doing this beyond that. But we'll soon see about all that. With that said and done, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner! Once again, we have Comment Corner reading comments from the previous video. Our comment for this week comes from Big X1, who says, "The fart sound woke up my dog. I enjoyed the volume overall, but I feel it dragged too much in the middle. Thank you for your comment, and for those of you playing along at home. In the previous episode, there was a fart joke about fat gum, so that's what that is in reference to. And as far as their feelings for the volume as a whole, I have to respect that. I mean, I think it was enjoyable enough. This wasn't a terrible volume. I think there was still some good there within it, but yeah, it really wasn't what I was expecting or what I was hoping it to be. Certainly not given what we had towards the start of the volume and from the end of the previous volume. Like, there's good stuff here, but it feels as though it's something that definitely needs a proofread or a second go over of the script. But hey ho, I've just done a nearly 20-minute review, so yeah, you can just go back and listen to anything else I've said about it. Well, that's then done. However, next week will be the first of my special episodes. I'm thinking it's going to end up being the review of the second My Hero Academia movie, as up until this point, that's the only one that I haven't done yet, so that'll be that. And after that, who knows what mysterious thing I've got waiting in the wings as we wait for the next season of My Hero Academia and the next season of Doctor Who to kick off, after they start pretty much the same week or within a week of each other. So yeah, it's going to be busy on this channel for the next 6 months and 8 weeks, depending on which way you want to be looking at it. But anyway, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!